All right, people, we're back. New week. We had our little hiatus. We talked some announcements. We hyped up the year, and now we're back, Luke. The season 2 premiere of Talkin Lost, Man of Science, Man of Faith, another crucially important episode within the canon
I think
of
you've said that
Lost.
every single episode, to be
Yeah, I
honest.
know I did, and that was season 1. But now but here's the thing, right? So here's the difference between season 1 and now for the rest of the show. Season 1 was the setup. We got to know these characters. Yeah, they were on the island. Yeah, we got our little bits, our little hints, our little inserts of the lost lore at various points. But now we're getting serious. You know, we have blown open the lid of the hatch, if you will. The survivors are starting to descend. We're starting to meet some new characters. They're seriously debating, okay, were the events that we witnessed in the last season even real? And it is only getting started. Like Zendaya said at the end of the first Dune, this is just the beginning. Luke, are you ready to dive fully in?
I'm more than ready.
Yes.
I feel like this is the actual show that they wanted to make, and they just had to get there.
Yes.
Get the main audience so that they can do what they really want to do.
Yes, indeed. All of that and more on today's season 2 premiere of Talkin' Lost, Man of Science, Man of Faith. See you guys shortly. All right, Luke, Man of Science, Man of Faith. Last time we saw our survivors was Jack and Locke had just successfully blown off the lid of the hatch with the dynamite from the black rock after Hurley saw the numbers etched on the lid and told them not to. Meanwhile, Charlie and Saeed managed to successfully get baby Aaron back to Claire at the caves after discovering Russo's deception. No word or mention of anybody on the raft after what happened last season. This is also the beginning of a storytelling trend that Lost would inspire a lot of other shows to do, where they would take kind of the dual storylines that were set up from the previous season and examine them across separate episodes. So this premiere, we pretty much only exclusively follow the people on the island, everything going on with the hatch and at the caves. And the next episode, Adrift, we will follow what's going on, resume, I should say, what's going on with Michael, Jin, and Sawyer on the raft. So the opening scene, of course, it should be expected that we pick up with meeting an entirely new character who I know, who you have not met yet. I was mistaken. I thought that we were introduced to this character in the finale of season 1. I was wrong. Of the new characters that we get in season 2, it was Ana Lucia, who is one of the tail end survivors who we'll meet in a couple episodes, that Jack meets in the airport in the finale of season 1. I had forgotten that his encounter in the flashback with Desmond was in this episode in order to set up Desmond's introduction in this episode. Like I said, the one Desmond Henry Hume. The opening scene follows him. He is revealed to have been living inside the hatch. We see an opening montage of him getting ready for the day up until the explosion goes off before we follow a tracking shot that leads up to the shot from the end of season 1, Jack and Locke looking down the hatch. So automatically the show was setting us up to be like, okay, like knowing all the survivors in season 1, and now we're going to start to examine more of the island. And this season is definitely the beginning of it. Like I said, this is referred to as collectively as the hatch season for a reason. But once again, continuing what Lost does so well, you know, making sure that they deliberately insert a new detail, a new piece of lore in each episode, not trying to give it to us all at once. And automatically, like, well, what were your thoughts after watching the first opening sequence? You're like, who is this guy? What the hell is going on? Is this supposed to be inside the hatch? Like, because Lost had was very, very good at like displaying seemingly normal looking events before revealing at the last minute how they were connected to the island.
Yeah, I was thinking, okay, this is either a flashback of someone we haven't met yet, or it is under the hatch. And then when the explosion sets off, it's like instantly clicks like, okay, this is right after the previous episode. So yeah, like he's typing something in a computer. He's getting ready. He's injecting himself with something. I guess we may find out more about that. But then, of course, it's like, hey, remember that thing from the last one? This is the other POV of that same event. That's something I love, seeing the same event from different POVs and how that kind of strengthens that moment and makes it more memorable.
Yes, it's funny because I'm writing a script now, actually, not to toot my own horn. I know we're here to talk about Lost, but I've been writing a script for the first time in several years, and I'm noticing a lot of Lost seeping its way into it. Even though, again, it's like it was one of those things where I'm like, oh man, I'm having fun with this one event. But I need to introduce these other characters. Let's do the same event, but from the other character's POV. And I did not even realizing that I'm getting that Lost because Lost
Great
was
writers steal. Like,
exactly. Exactly. Well, no. Great writers pay homage. Bad writers steal. That's the rule if we're gonna get it
I've
right.
heard it many different ways
It works either way.
from many different authors.
It works either way. There's no like one set stance for it. But yeah, so obviously again we have the survivors deliberating over it. Jack of course is like, yeah, that thing is like 40 50 feet down. There's no way we're gonna get everybody down there all at once. And Locke is like, man, don't you really want to see what's going on there? So that's the other piece obviously of this that's established is, once again, this episode is called Man of Science, Man of Faith. That phrase was kind of hinted at all throughout season 1, and now we're finally here. We're finally getting to it. That's another kind of essentially crucial piece of Lost lore going forward that really follows us for the next couple of seasons, is really the divide between Jack and Locke. Jack really trying to examine everything from a practical standpoint, trying to potentially, because he is very weary of any supernatural things that may be happening, whereas Locke is just all in on it, fully embracing it, fully understanding, okay, this island is more than the practical stuff that we have been witnessing up until this point. And he is just fully in, to the point where he is kind of willing to, basically admitting to that he's willing to like sacrifice, other people for it. And of course, we're going to see kind of the repercussions, the ripple effects of this, if you will, over the course of the next couple of seasons. And you also kind of, see the two compatriots who went with them, Kate and Hurley, also kind of reflectively, buying into them and getting more into their backstories, where you have Kate asking Locke about why he wants to go into the hatch so badly, and Locke, of course, doing his usual Lockness, where he retorts and is like, well, he's like, yeah, I probably am crazy, but you saw that column of black smoke that tried to drag me into that hole, so I guess you're crazy too. Once she admits it, she's like, yeah, I saw that. And then Hurley telling Jack the story about the numbers and how he met them, and of course Jack being like, Jack's only reason I love this, because literally it was, again, the memories were kind of coming back to me of the first time that I watched this. And the funny thing is, Hurley tells Jack basically the entirety of his backstory in kind of one sitting, where he's like, yeah, I was in a mental asylum and I met this guy, Leonard. And the whole time he kept saying the numbers. And then one time I was out, buying, something, and the numbers were going through my head. And I'm like, oh, okay, what if I played them for the lottery and I won $114 million? But that's when all the bad stuff happened. And the only thing that Jack takes away from that whole thing is, you were in a mental asylum. And he's like, dude, like, that's Hurley taking, like, another classic Hurley line. It's just hysterical. Yeah, but then there was a thing of where it's like Jack also, it's like, it's not that I don't believe you, Hurley, but there's no way to kind of prove anything that's going on ultimately. And I don't know, I felt like that was a little bit disregardful of Jack. Like, even with Jack staunchly needing to believe in something practical, almost to the point where he feels like he's being stubborn for the sake of being stubborn. That's another thing too, also, that you're going to see, is that the first season did such a good job of setting up all the characters, but really Jack and Locke, respectively, that, what's it called? That now when it gets to, we're gonna, season 2 is what I like to call like the flaw season, where you start to get into some of the characters like doing some things and playing into their weaknesses, if you will, almost to a fault, where you see Jack kind of almost refusing to believe something, even though it's blatantly in front of his eyes, because it's like, oh, that can't be. There's no logical explanation for that, which kind of puts more of the favor and more of the, which kind of puts the survivors more in Locke's camp, until Locke does something just so batshit and off the deep end that people are like, oh, well, we kind of are forced to go back to Jack. So that's another reason why kind of this title is so symbolic, besides kind of what's been set up about those two characters, is the fact of, now that we've been on this island long enough, we've spent enough time with these characters, we're kind of getting into the respective of both extremes, if you will. What happens when you go too rational versus what happens when you go a little bit too mythical, a little bit too fantastical, if you will. What are you thinking so far? Just walk me through your thoughts of like the characters' interaction so far, like post the hatch, and maybe like whose side you're wondering is right, quote unquote.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is like there's a good middle that they should be exploring, but for the sake of keeping the show entertaining, you need characters on the extreme ends, as you said. And yeah, that Jack the interaction with Hurley, I was like you didn't even like slightly acknowledge the numbers. Like, I mean, I don't know. It's a small moment. And of course, Locke, I'm sure he's going to be assembling his disciples, if you will, from the rest of the survivors, as will Jack, trying to keep everyone, logically thinking and whatnot. So I think it's going to be a great dynamic to explore as they descend.
Yeah, well, the other thing too also is that, like, even with Jack, trying to be as rational as he can, being like, look, there's no way that the ladder's broken. There's no way that we can get everybody down into the hatch at a time. Just for him to be completely disregardful of Hurley's story, even though he can go back. They see the numbers etched into the hatch. As rational and as skeptical as you would have to be, that's a pretty fucking big coincidence to see that exact set of numbers sketched on the side of it, or at least I would be. So we follow them back to the caves. Jack tells everybody. There's also a subplot about Shannon looking for Vincent. Of course, feeling guilty because Vincent's run off into the jungle, and she's like, "Oh, that's the only thing anybody ever asked me to do." She runs off in the jungle. Saeed follows her, and this is our first instance of Shannon seeing a vision of a dripping wet Walt babbling in some unknown language. Now, will the storyline actually go somewhere? Or is this kind of just another one of Lost's many infamous red herrings that's just setting up for a character to exit us abruptly, if you will? We shall see. But, like I said, this episode is mostly focused on the hatch and the survivors' immediate reaction to it. Jack comes back. He tells everybody that, like, look, we found the hatch, but it's too deep to go into. We can't really figure, we don't really know what's inside. The outside said quarantine. So we should probably just stay here. And everyone's like, well, what about the others? And of course, Charlie, after the events of last episode, is immediately skeptical and is like, there are no others. Russo was lying, So that, of course, raises the question of, oh, were the others real or not? But then, of course, although I find
there was
it
an Ethan scenario.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, wait, Charlie, did you seem to forget the dude who strung you up and hung you? So that's kind of a little bit of a question mark for me, if you will. And then, of course, Locke comes up and is like, Jack, you're right. It's probably really stupid for us to descend into the hatch. There's no logical reasoning for it. So we probably all should wait here, but I'm tired of waiting and I'm going in. So he gets a bunch of cables and goes to the hatch. Kate follows him. And finally, after a while, Jack is kind of forced to go with them. He's like, all right, screw this. We got to go. We got to do this. So they follow Locke and Kate. First, Locke lowers Kate down. What's it called? Things seem to be going well. And then, of course, they're not, because things never go well in these scenarios. The mysterious light that went off when Locke was banging on the hatch after Boone was originally injured goes off. Kate is sucked in against Locke's will. Locke goes in himself, ties the rope to a tree. Jack follows them. And this is where I want to take a break from the main storyline, because obviously this is where kind of the flashback aligns, and dive into the flashbacks in this episode, where we're continuing. It's another Jack backstory. And it's funny because it's a little bit of a, this is where, so what I say about the flashbacks going forward is that the season 1 flashbacks were, I would say, the most essential ones in terms of dictating how they directly got to the island. And now that we know how they pretty much all got to the island, as far as the events that put them on the plane that got them to the island, now this season we're going to be getting into more of kind of filling in the pieces of their life, of their backstory, where the interesting thing is we got 3 Jack flashback episodes last season, but really only 2 of them, I would say, tied directly to how he got to the island, to the plane and on the island. The third one obviously was kind of just meant to complement his stress out time in order to try and save Boone by showing his wedding to Sarah, played in the show by Julie Bowen, Claire Dunphy. So now we're getting kind of like more of the pieces in order to fill in some of the context and backstory, some of the pieces that we were maybe missing from their story, because we still don't know how Locke was paralyzed. We still don't know the exact event that led to Kate going on the run. We still don't know exactly, ironically, we know pretty much how all the other characters got to Australia, but we're missing one. We don't know how Charlie got to Australia and what he was doing there, So there's still a little pieces of backstory that are missing from each of the characters. And we start to get that in this episode with Jack, where this episode shows how him and his future wife, Sarah, met ultimately, which was that she was brought in after being in a tragic car accident, with that had severely fractured her spine and was giving her very little chance of being able to walk again. Jack is, of course, it's ironic, too, that in this episode, the same guy who was telling him that he didn't have what it took, his father, Christian, who placed all this pressure on him growing up as a kid, And now the same guy is telling him, oh, you could have a little bit more better bedside manner. You could give people hope, which of course ties into Jack's thing of like being a little bit too rational. It's like you don't have to be all reality with people all the time. You could give them a little levity, which of course ties into what Hurley was saying when he was making a joke before on the island trying to cheer Jack up. Jack could be a little bit of a what's the term that I'm trying to remember from the Soprano? Looking a little blue in the face, if you will. So, what's it called? So that backstory is kind of in order to essentially inspire some hope, because it shows the story of how he ultimately was able to save Sarah's life, where she had a very, very little chance of being able to walk ever again. He promised her that he was going to fix her while she was on the operating table, because she said that she didn't mind if she was going to be able to wheel around at her wedding. He delivers the news to her fiance, portrayed by Anson Mount, Black Bolt from the Inhumans.
I thought he looked familiar.
Yep, and Multiverse of Madness. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep,
So,
and it shows
there's another actor, lesser known actor that pops up in Lost that I vaguely recall. We're gonna get to one in a bit.
There's another one from one of your Lost knockoff shows, but then it shows him running up and down the steps of the stadium after he's performed the surgery, and he runs into Desmond ultimately. This is going to tie back in, portrayed by Henry Ian Cusick. So we've already seen Desmond, but only briefly. We didn't know who he was, and this is once again showing again everybody on the island is connected somehow, whether they realize it or not. Jack runs into Desmond. He tells him that he tells him, obviously that he promised that he was going to help heal this woman, and that ultimately he was not able to uphold that promise. And Desmond is like, well, you gave her hope, didn't you? Or something along those lines. I don't remember exactly what he says, but Desmond essentially tells Jack that he's planning for a race around the world, essentially, in order to try and make it up to his daughter. So that's kind of our introduction to Desmond. A brief moment of like kind of giving Jack hope before he goes back in and talks to Sarah. And he unfortunately breaks the news to her that she'll never walk again. And Sarah's like, then why can I wiggle my toes? And it's kind of like one of those like brief, like, oh my God, like a miracle happened. Like Jack performed a miracle, but he can't explain how he did it, because by all scientific methods, she shouldn't have been able to walk again. So that's kind of one of those moments where you're like, oh, like, was there some magic going around, or is Jack just really that good? I don't know. What did you think of this flashback?
I didn't think even with my Lost conspiracy board that's behind me on the left. I didn't think that was island interference. That was just Jack did better than he thought he did, and it turned out just a little bit of help from. I'm not gonna say that. It's just sometimes that happens, because hear these things. You're never gonna walk again, and they start walking. So yeah, obviously we heard about this in last season's Jack's flashback episode,
right?
But to actually fully see it happen is adds a whole nother layer to it. It ties into Jack's place on the island, how he's trying to give them hope now after he tried to better his bedside manner in the past. So yeah, just even when you hear about an event, seeing it just adds a whole nother element to it.
It really does. It really, really does. And so, of course, that leads us back to the island. Jack descends down the hatch. He passes a brief part of the wall where his key is being magnetically drawn to it, a hint at the very strange electromagnetic energy that is going on in the hatch and around at other points on the island. He walks in. He sees kind of the central hub. He sees the very old-fashioned computer that Desmond was typing on in the opening scene. And, of course, Locke comes out and is like, I wouldn't do that, Jack. And then, of course, Jack is trying to get an explanation from Locke, being like, what the hell is going on down here? And then, of course, Desmond comes out holding the gun. And immediately you're like, what the hell is going on? Because, of course, your brain is trying to put together the piece of it. It's like, okay, Jack and Desmond know each other. They just don't realize it yet. What the hell is Desmond doing on the island? How did he get to the island? What was he doing in the hatch? And so of course it's that brilliant, like, connecting all the pieces together. And it's like you've been saying, Luke, one question answered, another 5 raised, and we are fully into season 2 now as far as figuring out, because again, so now we're establishing that not only do we have the survivors here, not only are the others on the island, even though they've only been vaguely hinted at, but now we're getting into the Dharma Initiative and starting to understand their role in the island's lore, as well as, how other people have been on the island throughout the island's history. That was only hinted at in season 1, and now we're getting Desmond is our first confirmation of that. Even though his name, I don't believe. Oh no, he does tell Jack his name in the flashback, so we do have his name. Desmond Hume, portrayed by Henry Ian Cusick, who previously who appeared on one of your favorite Lost knockoff shows.
He did previously. He did the 100.
He was on the 100, right? Yeah, you're right. He was after Lost. Yeah. So we got our first entry. What was his character's name on the 100?
Kane.
Kane. Yeah. Well,
he's kind of a leader of the people, not the teens that went down, but of the people that stayed up and
got it.
Later went down.
Got it. So what?
And now that I'm remembering, like season 1 was also establishing everyone, and season 2, it's like an underground facility. Is that what?
Wow. So the 100 really just did not give a fuck about just blatantly ripping off Lost.
Yeah. Season 3, they're fighting AI, and then season 4, there's a nuclear fire coming. I don't know if that's another.
Well, I can promise you right now
indicator.
that's not what happens directly in Lost season 3 and 4. But who knows? There may be some more connections that we were not previously aware of. So, like I said, ends on a cliffhanger. Next week, Adrift. We're going to be covering what happened with the fallout with Michael, Jin, and Sawyer on the raft, and we're going to see what happens. And then, like I said, we still have to meet the tail end survivors as well. But like I said, already season 2 is shaping us up. Like I said, season 1 was the intro, and now season 2. This is where the show really begins. So very, very good premiere. Definitely one of my favorite episodes overall of Lost. This was an action-packed episode too. It started and it really did not stop until the very end. So yeah, all I can say is I am fully in, and I am ready to be back on the island. I assume you're very happy to be back on the island too after our little 2-week hiatus.
I'm very happy. This is a great catch-up episode. Like watching this when it came out would have been like, okay, like we're just catching everyone up from season 2. Even though it's like immediately after, you still gotta set the pieces, if you will, and then and the next episode will obviously be a continuation of that with the Team Raft.
Right. That's the other thing too. Also, is that it is always impressive to me how, for the most part, this show was almost entirely in real time, and across 6 years, however many episodes they did, that's a tough act to follow. I think there's only like 1 or 2 time jumps, if that. But then, of course, once you get into the time travel later on, like it all gets topsy-turvy. But for the most part, the fact that the vast majority of this show does take place in real time has always been an impressive feat to me. Because if my memory serves, the only other show that was able to do that really well, particularly well, was Breaking Bad, where the fact that all 5 seasons of Breaking Bad take place pretty much in real time over the course of a year is absolutely insane to me. So with that being said, that's it. That is our debut for Talkin' Lost Season 2. Like I said, we are not stopping. We are going through every single episode of Seasons 2 and 3 for the rest of the year. We'll be reviewing some movies along the way. In fact, stay tuned. After this episode, I will be going over the 10th Best Picture nominee, I'm Still Here, the Brazilian movie, with a friend of mine as well. So we'll be going live right after that, so you guys will not want to miss that. But in the meantime, we're back on the island, Luke, and we are not leaving again, not for a very long time. I know.
Great place to be. There's always a new thing to find.
You would be one of those people where you would live on the island if you could. You would not want to be rescued, ultimately.
It'd be so much easier.
I know. I'm with you. Just no smartphones, no technology, no dealing with all the bullshit in society. Oh, it sounds like
send out cryptic signals with the old-timey computer.
Exactly. So with that being said, Luke, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
They can follow me at Luke Reviews on YouTube. I'm trying to be more consistent this year. There's a video about me speculating on the highest grossing movies of the year, and I'm already wrong because apparently there's a Chinese movie that has almost made $2 billion. People
never account for those Chinese and Indian films that come out of nowhere.
Someone commented, I'm like, I think it's be this one. I'm like, what is this?
You're like, what is
the highest grossing movies? It's like 8th all time already.
Yep.
Like,
yep.
Like people, invalid video.
We are so drastically always underestimating the power of the Chinese box office ultimately, because there'll be like 8 movies that are like already the $1 billion range. You're like, where did these come from? We've never heard of any of these movies, and the Chinese are just kind of like laughing us. Oh man. Well, you guys can follow me with everything going on at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms, at Official Talkin' TV Podcast across all platforms. We'll be back next week with Adrift, and also to recap the Oscars afterwards. And 2 weeks after that, Luke, our boy Bong Joon-ho and Robert Pattinson, Mickey 17, will be back too, and we'll officially be kicking off kind of the real blockbuster season after kind of the disaster show that was Brave New World. But with that being said, people, you guys know where to follow me. I'll be back in a couple minutes anyways. Get lost. We'll see you guys next week.